Some people believe that a person's life can be measured by the wealth they accumulate, the titles they hold, or the size of the house they leave behind. But when I think of David, I don't think of the millions he made, or the international consultancy firm he built from the ground up with nothing but a second-hand laptop and a brilliant mind. I think of the quiet Sunday mornings. I think of the way the sunlight used to filter through our kitchen window, catching the steam rising from his coffee mug while he read the financial papers. I think of his laughter, low, warm, and entirely unbothered by the chaos of the outside world. David was my anchor. We met when his business was just a fragile blueprint, a dream shared over late-night takeout in a cramped studio apartment. Together, we poured our lives into it. For 12 years, I was his confidant, his partner, and his fiercest supporter. As the company grew, expanding across borders and evolving into a multi-million-dollar empire, our bond only deepened. We weren't just husband and wife. We were a team. He protected me, and I protected him. But success, as David often reminded me, always draws eyes. Especially the eyes of those who did nothing to help you build it. It was a Tuesday evening, roughly 6 months before the world fell apart. Outside, a torrential autumn rain was lashing against the windows of our study. David was sitting at his mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of legal folders, corporate restructuring documents, and offshore account ledgers. I walked in carrying 2 mugs of chamomile tea, setting one down beside his laptop. He looked up, his eyes tired but filled with that familiar gentle warmth. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and sighed, pulling me down to sit on the arm of his chair. "You're working too late, David," I whispered, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "The European markets will still be there tomorrow." He smiled, wrapping his arm around my waist, but his expression remained unusually serious. "It's not the markets I'm worried about, Clara. It's the restructuring. I'm finalizing the legal shelters for our international subsidiaries in Luxembourg and Singapore." I glanced at the complex corporate flowcharts on his screen. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong. In fact, the assets are performing better than we ever anticipated," David explained, his voice dropping to a low, cautious tone. "But because of the new cross-border tax compliance treaties, these funds are incredibly sensitive right now. I've spent the last 3 years building a highly specific legal framework to transition these offshore holdings into our domestic trust." He turned his chair to face me fully, taking both of my hands in his. His grip was firm, almost urgent. "Clara, I need you to listen to me very carefully. If anything ever happens to me, you must let Arthur handle the liquidation of these specific accounts. No one else." I felt a sudden cold chill at his words. "David, don't talk like that. You're perfectly healthy. Nothing is going to happen to you." I know, he said softly, squeezing my hands to reassure me. "But life is unpredictable, and I need peace of mind knowing you understand how dangerous this specific setup is. These international assets carry a massive, immediate, and heavily compounded foreign tax liability. If someone tries to bypass the trust, if they try to force an immediate lump sum liquidation directly into a personal domestic account without filing the specialized international disclosure forms, it triggers a financial black hole." He pointed to a highlighted section on a legal document. "The IRS flags these automatic cross-border transfers instantly under the strict anti-money laundering and tax evasion protocols. If someone uncleared grabs this money blindly, thinking they've hit the jackpot, the government won't just take the taxes. They will impose a 100% penalty on the principal, flag it as criminal fraud, and freeze every single asset associated with the transferee. It would utterly ruin whoever touched it." I looked into his eyes, seeing the absolute gravity of his warning. "I understand, David, I promise, but let's focus on the present. Let the lawyers worry about the worst-case scenarios." He leaned in, kissing my forehead. "You're right. I love you too much to ever leave you unprotected. We think we have all the time in the world. We plan for retirement, we plan for vacations, we plan for old age. We never plan for a random Tuesday afternoon when the phone rings and a voice on the other end tells you that your husband's heart simply stopped beating during a routine corporate lunch. Massive cardiac arrest. No warning. No chance for a final goodbye. Just like that, David was gone. The days that followed are a blur of gray shadows and echoing silence. The house that once felt so warm and alive suddenly felt like a tomb. Every room held a ghost of his presence. His coat still hung by the door. His half-read book sat on the nightstand, and his scent still lingered on his favorite sweater. I didn't cry in public. I couldn't. The grief was a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest, freezing me in place. I felt entirely hollowed out, as if the best part of me had died right along with him. I was a widow at 34, left alone in a massive, empty house, drowning in a sea of unanswerable questions. And it was in this exact moment of my deepest, most paralyzing vulnerability that the vultures decided it was time to circle.
Grief is supposed to be a sacred thing.
It is a time when those who loved the departed gathered to lean on one another, to share the burden of an irreplaceable loss. But for some people, a funeral isn't a place of mourning. It is a marketplace, a stage, an opportunity. I learned this the moment my mother-in-law, Evelyn, arrived at David's funeral. Evelyn had always been a looming, icy presence in our lives, though David had done his best to keep her at a distance. She was a woman consumed by status, obsessed with the appearance of wealth, and utterly hollow inside. She had never forgiven David for marrying me, a girl from a working-class background who didn't fit into her country club social circles. When David's business took off, her coldness turned into a suffocating, aggressive entitlement. She treated his success as if it were her own personal inheritance, frequently demanding exorbitant monthly allowances and expensive gifts, which David provided solely out of a misplaced sense of filial duty. At the church, while I sat frozen in the front pew, staring blankly at the polished mahogany of David's casket, I felt a sharp, perfume-laden breeze cut through the heavy air. Evelyn sat down beside me. She wasn't weeping. Her eyes, shielded by oversized designer sunglasses, swept across the cathedral, meticulously calculating the cost of the flower arrangements and sizing up the high-profile corporate executives in attendance. "A shame," Evelyn murmured, her voice smooth, entirely devoid of tremor. He had so much left to accomplish. The business was just reaching its peak. I didn't look at her. "I miss my husband, Evelyn." She let out a soft, dismissive tisk. "Of course you do, dear. But we must think of the family legacy now, David's true legacy. I expect his corporate accounts are securely locked for the time being. We will need to review his financial standing immediately after the service." I felt a sudden, sickening jolt of disgust. My husband's body was less than 10 feet away, and his own mother was already mentally auditing his bank accounts. I simply closed my eyes and focused on breathing, counting the seconds until I could escape her suffocating presence. But Evelyn was not a woman to be ignored, and she had no intention of waiting. Exactly 4 days after we laid David to rest, I was sitting in the study. The room was dark, lit only by the single desk lamp David used to work by. I was holding his favorite fountain pen, staring at the empty leather chair across from me, trying to summon the strength to face the mountain of paperwork that comes with a sudden death. Suddenly, the heavy front doorbell rang, echoing aggressively through the quiet house. Before I could even rise from my chair, the heavy oak doors of the study were pushed open. Evelyn marched in, draped in a tailored black trench coat, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. But she wasn't alone. Flanking her was a short, heavy-set man in a wrinkled, ill-fitting gray suit. He carried a battered leather briefcase and wore an expression of nervous arrogance. He looked like the kind of attorney who advertised on late-night television, promising quick payouts for minor fender benders. "Evelyn," I said, standing up, my voice trembling slightly with a mix of exhaustion and rising anger. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just burst into my home." "Your home?" Evelyn scoffed, a venomous, triumphant smile playing at the corners of her lips. "We'll see about that, Clara. Sit down. We have legal matters to settle, and I don't intend to waste my time bandying words with you." The man in the wrinkled suit stepped forward, extending a damp hand that I flatly ignored. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance. My name is Marcus Vance. No relation to the family, of course. I am the legal representative handling the true estate of the late David Vance." I locked eyes with Evelyn. "David's attorney is Arthur Pendleton. He has handled all of our corporate and personal affairs for over a decade. I have an appointment with him tomorrow morning." "Arthur Pendleton is history," Evelyn snapped, waving her hand dismissively as she took a seat on my velvet sofa without asking. "Arthur represents the old arrangements, the ones you manipulated David into making. But David realized his mistakes before he passed. Marcus, show her." Marcus nodded quickly, opening his briefcase with a sharp snap. He pulled out a stapled packet of legal documents and laid them flat on David's mahogany desk, sliding them toward me. "This," Marcus stated, clearing his throat importantly, "is the last will and testament of David Vance, executed exactly 3 weeks prior to his untimely passing. It explicitly revokes any and all prior wills, trusts, or codicils." My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached out and picked up the papers. My eyes flew down the dense legal jargon, scanning the lines until the core text practically screamed off the page. "I hereby bequeath all my personal property, the primary residence located at 1422 Crestview Drive, all active life insurance policies, and 100% of my controlling shares and liquid assets held within Vance International Consultancy and its global subsidiaries, solely and unconditionally to my mother, Evelyn Vance." I stopped breathing. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, David and I were in Cabo, celebrating our anniversary. He hadn't seen his mother in 6 months. I flipped frantically to the final page. There at the bottom was the signature. David Vance. To the untrained eye, it looked authentic. It had the same sharp slant, the same long fluid stroke on the D. But I had signed thousands of documents alongside my husband. I knew the exact pressure he applied to the paper. I knew that when David wrote his signature quickly, the crossbar of the A always connected to the next letter. It was a careful, calculated trace. Worse yet, the notary public stamp at the bottom belonged to a small, independent currency exchange clinic on the shady side of town, a place David wouldn't have stepped foot into in a million years. I looked up from the document, my hands steadying as a cold realization washed over me. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a blatant, desperate, criminal forgery. Evelyn had hired this bottom-tier lawyer to fabricate a will to completely strip me of everything David and I had built, leaving me entirely destitute. "Well," Evelyn demanded, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with an ugly, unbridled malice. "Are you going to cry, or are you going to start packing? Because according to that document, everything in this house, including the clothes in David's closet, belongs to me. You were a temporary fixture in his life, Clara. A phase. But real blood always wins. I am his mother, and I am taking back what is rightfully mine." Marcus adjusted his tie, trying to look imposing. "The document is fully notarized, Mrs. Vance. If you attempt to contest this in probate court, we will tie up the estate in litigation for years, leaving you with absolutely nothing to live on. I highly suggest you cooperate." I looked at the forged will, and then I looked at Evelyn's smug, arrogant face. She thought she had backed me into a corner. She thought she had won. But as I stared at the specific cause, mentioning the immediate lump sum liquidation of David's global subsidiaries, a sudden electric memory flashed through my mind. If someone uncleared grabs this money blindly, thinking they've hit the jackpot, the government won't just take the taxes, they will impose a 100% penalty, flag it as criminal fraud, and freeze every single asset associated with the transferee. The words of my late husband echoed in my ears like a divine warning. A slow, chilling realization began to take root in my mind. Evelyn didn't just want the house. She wanted the millions sitting in the offshore accounts. She wanted it all, and she wanted it immediately. She had no idea she was holding a live grenade with the pin already pulled. I lowered my head, letting my hair fall forward to hide my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a ragged, trembling breath to escape my lips. I needed to look devastated. I needed to look utterly, completely broken. "I can't believe he would do this to me," I whispered, my voice cracking with a perfectly practiced despair. Evelyn let out a harsh, triumphant laugh. "Believe it, darling. Now get out of my sight. Marcus, let's file the probate paperwork first thing in the morning." When you are drowning in grief, people expect you to be weak. They expect you to lash out, to scream at the injustice of the world, or to curl into a ball and surrender. Evelyn counted on my despair. She thought my tears in the study were a sign of total defeat. She didn't realize they were the curtain rising on a very different kind of performance. She's bypassing the domestic trust entirely, forcing Marcus to execute a lump sum cross-border transfer directly into her personal checking account at Capital First Bank. "And what happens if she does that?" I asked. Arthur froze. He stared at the paper, then looked up at me, his eyes widening as the pieces began to click together in his brilliant legal mind. "My God," Arthur breathed, leaning back in his chair. "David's foreign restructuring, the anti-money laundering triggers, the uncleared assets." "Exactly," I replied, leaning forward. "David warned me 6 months ago. Those specific funds carry an aggressive, immediate foreign tax liability. David spent 3 years building a highly specialized domestic trust to transition those funds legally. If anyone touches them outside of that trust, especially if they force an immediate lump sum liquidation without filing the specialized international disclosure forms, it triggers an automatic financial audit. The IRS flags it instantly as structured tax evasion heavily compounded by fraud." Arthur's hand shook slightly as he realized the magnitude of what lay before us. "The penalties are 100% of the principal, plus compounded interest, plus criminal fraud charges. Clara, if she forces that transfer, the IRS won't just seize the inheritance. Because she is signing legal affidavits claiming the assets are entirely hers, they will levy penalties against her entire net worth to cover the multi-million-dollar deficit. Her personal savings, her home, her retirement accounts, everything will be frozen and seized." "Yes," I said quietly, "every single penny she has ever hoarded." Arthur stared at me in disbelief. "Clara, if we don't contest this will, you are technically allowing a fraudulent document to pass through probate. You are letting her take the house, the life insurance, and the domestic accounts, at least temporarily. The house is fully paid off, and the domestic accounts are a fraction of David's actual worth," I reasoned calmly. "Let her have them. Let her move into my home. Let her feel like she has completely stripped me of my dignity. The greedier she feels, the faster she will push Marcus to liquidate those offshore millions. She won't consult a real corporate tax attorney because she thinks she's pulled off the perfect crime. She won't want anyone else looking at her stolen prize." Arthur let out a slow, breathy laugh, a mixture of shock and profound respect. "You're going to let her walk right into the buzzsaw." "I am going to stand completely out of her way," I corrected him. "Arthur, I want you to file a very weak, poorly constructed objection to the probate court. Make it look like we are trying to fight, but doing a terrible job of it. Let Marcus win every single preliminary hearing. I want Evelyn to feel completely untouchable. And what about you? Arthur asked, his eyes filled with concern. Where will you go? She's going to evict you from the house the moment the judge signs the temporary order. Let her, I smiled. I'll rent a modest apartment downtown. I will pack David's clothes, his books, and his personal journals, the things she doesn't care about because they don't have a dollar sign attached to them. I will sit in that apartment, Arthur, and I will watch her destroy herself. 2 weeks later, we stood in the hallway of the county probate court. Evelyn arrived looking like a queen returning to her throne, flanked by Marcus and a small entourage of distant family members who had suddenly materialized the moment they smelled money. She wore a pristine white wool coat, contrasting sharply with my simple, muted black dress. When the judge called our case, Arthur put on a masterclass in controlled failure. He stuttered over his opening remarks, presented weak arguments about David's intent, and accidentally missed the deadline to submit our secondary handwriting analysis. Marcus, emboldened by Arthur's apparent incompetence, practically preened in front of the judge, presenting the forged notary stamp with absolute, unshakable confidence. Within 30 minutes, the judge gave his ruling. Pending a final review, Evelyn was granted temporary executorship of the estate, with full authority to oversee the domestic and international assets. Outside the courtroom, the heavy oak doors had barely closed behind us before Evelyn stopped me in the hallway. The distant relatives stood back, smirking and whispering among themselves. "Well, Clara," Evelyn sneered, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "I told you that real blood always wins. Your little sob story didn't fool the judge, and it certainly didn't fool me. Marcus tells me the transfer paperwork for the overseas accounts is already being processed. By next week, David's real family will have what belongs to them." I lowered my gaze, letting my shoulders slump. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a tear to roll down my cheek. "Please, Evelyn," I pleaded, my voice cracking perfectly. "The house. At least let me stay in the house for a few months, until I can find a place. It's all I have left of him." Evelyn let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the hallway like glass. "Stay in my house? Absolutely not. You have 48 hours to pack your bags and clear out, Clara. I'm having the locks changed on Friday morning. Don't leave a single piece of your cheap trash behind." She turned on her heel, her designer boots clicking triumphantly away down the corridor, leaving me standing alone in the shadows. As I wiped the single tear from my cheek, I let out a long, slow breath. The trap was set, and Evelyn had just taken her first giant step inside. There is nothing quite as blinding as sudden, unearned wealth. When a person steps over a corpse to grab a fortune, they don't look down at their feet to see where they are walking. They look up at the sky, convinced they have finally become gods. Evelyn didn't waste a single hour. True to her word, 48 hours after the court hearing, she arrived at the house with a locksmith and a moving crew. I didn't fight her. I had spent those 2 days packing only what truly mattered. I didn't care about the imported Italian leather sofas, the crystal chandeliers, or the high-end appliances. I packed David's favorite soft cotton shirts, his well-worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea, his personal leather-bound journals, and the framed photographs of us laughing on beaches no one else in his family had ever bothered to visit. As I carried my final box down the grand front steps, Evelyn was standing on the porch, sipping a glass of expensive champagne at 10 o'clock in the morning. She watched me with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Make sure you check her pockets, Marcus," she called out to her lawyer, who was standing by his car, checking his phone. "People like her love to steal a little souvenir on their way out the door." I stopped on the bottom step. I turned around, looking up at her. I made sure my face looked pale, my eyes hollowed by exhaustion. "I'm only taking my memories, Evelyn. You've taken everything else." "And don't you forget it," she snapped, taking a long sip of her wine. This house is finally back in the hands of a real Vance. Now get off my driveway. The landscape architects are arriving in 20 minutes to tear out those hideous roses you planted. I walked away without another word. I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. It was small, it was quiet, and it was the perfect sanctuary. From that little apartment, through the lens of a burner social media account and regular updates from Arthur, I watched Evelyn's grand circus begin. When you forge a will to steal millions, a sensible person might keep a low profile. They might let the money sit quietly, moving it in small, undetectable increments. But Evelyn's entire identity was built on the desperate need for validation. She wanted the world to know she was rich, and she wanted them to know it immediately. Within 3 weeks of forcing the domestic accounts into her name, Evelyn went on a spending spree that was nothing short of manic. She bought a brand new, top-of-the-line luxury German SUV in a metallic gold finish, parking it prominently in the driveway of the house I had built with David. She hired an interior design team to completely gut our home, replacing our warm personal decor with cold, sterile marble and gilded mirrors that looked like a cheap imitation of a European palace. But her greatest performance was on social media. Every single day, she posted updates for her country club friends to see. Photos of her holding shopping bags from high-end designer boutiques. Videos of her raising a glass on a private yacht she had chartered for a 2-week Mediterranean vacation. She dragged a dozen of her distant, sycophantic relatives along with her, paying for their flights, their 5-star hotels, and their expensive dinners, fully basking in their hollow praise. Under one photo of her sitting poolside in Monaco, she wrote the caption, "Finally living the life I was always meant to have. Justice always prevails, and the family legacy is secure. No more parasites." I sat at my small kitchen table, sipping my tea, and scrolled past the image. I felt no anger, no resentment, only a profound, chilling sense of inevitability. I knew that every luxury boutique she frequented, every wire transfer she approved for those first-class flights, was drawing a bright, neon bullseye on her back. Evelyn's cruelty wasn't limited to spending David's money. She wanted to rewrite history. She began systematically turning the entire extended family against me. At the annual family summer gathering, an event I was of course strictly barred from attending, Evelyn took center stage. According to a cousin who still felt a shred of guilt, Evelyn spent the entire evening telling a twisted narrative to anyone who would listen. She claimed that I had isolated David in his final years. She told them that I had tried to force him to sign over his business to my own working-class family. She even went so far as to imply that the stress of my alleged greed is what caused his sudden heart attack. She was a gold digger from day one, Evelyn told the family, her voice dripping with artificial pity. If I hadn't stepped in with that final will David secretly signed, that woman would have taken every penny of our family's history and given it to her low-life relatives. She left David's memory in ruins, but thank God I saved his estate. The family, entirely blinded by the expensive gifts and vacations Evelyn was handing out, nodded along in agreement. Overnight, people I had known for a decade stopped answering my texts. Cousins I had helped put through college blocked my number. I was entirely ostracized, painted as a black widow who had tried to rob a grieving mother. Arthur called me the morning after the family gathering. His voice was tense with indignation. "Clara, the things she is saying about you, it's defamation. It's disgusting. We have enough evidence of the forgery to stop this right now if you want to. You don't have to endure this public humiliation." I looked out the window of my small apartment, watching the city traffic move below. "Arthur," I said calmly, "let her talk. Let her convince the whole world she is the rightful owner of that fortune. Because the louder she screams it, the more legal affidavits she signs, the tighter the noose becomes." "Marcus filed the final liquidation paperwork yesterday," Arthur reported, his tone shifting from anger to absolute gravity. "He bypassed the trust completely, just as we expected. He authorized a direct, lump sum wire transfer of $24 million from David's Singapore subsidiary straight into Evelyn's personal checking account. The money cleared this morning. I closed my eyes, a deep, serene sense of peace washing over me. 24 million, I murmured, without the international disclosure forms? Not a single form filed, Arthur confirmed. Marcus doesn't even know they exist. They think they've won the ultimate victory, Clara. Evelyn just posted a video of them popping champagne in Marcus's office. Then the clock has officially started, I said softly. Enjoy the champagne, Evelyn. It's the most expensive drink you'll ever have.
There is a fundamental law of physics that states for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In the world of finance, that law has a name: the Internal Revenue Service. They don't yell. They don't make dramatic scenes in hallways. They don't post their victories on social media. They move in silence through automated flags, algorithms, and freezing orders. And when they finally strike, they do so with the absolute, unyielding weight of the federal government. It took exactly 47 days from the moment the $24 million landed in Evelyn's personal checking account. I was sitting in my small apartment, enjoying a quiet evening with a book, when Arthur called me. He didn't even say hello. He just whispered 4 words. The freeze is in. According to Arthur's contacts, the automated cross-border tracking system had flagged the massive, unsheltered transfer from the Singapore subsidiary the exact second it hit Capital First Bank. Because Evelyn and Marcus had completely bypassed the specialized international disclosure forms, the transaction was automatically categorized as an unreported foreign financial asset transaction with intent to evade. And because Evelyn had spent the last month signing legal affidavits, probate documents, and bank forms, swearing under penalty of perjury that she was the sole unconditional owner of these funds, she had legally trapped herself. She couldn't claim it was a mistake. She couldn't blame it on David. She had legally declared over and over again that the money was hers. The IRS didn't just ask for the taxes. They applied the maximum compounded penalties for fraudulent non-disclosure. 100% of the principal asset value, plus interest, plus a criminal tax evasion penalty. Evelyn didn't just owe the taxes on $24 million. She owed the government nearly $30 million. And to secure that debt, the federal government didn't just freeze the offshore money. They placed an immediate, total levy on every single asset associated with her Social Security number. The collapse was instantaneous and brutal. On a Tuesday morning, Evelyn walked into her favorite high-end boutique, picked out 3 designer handbags, and handed the cashier her platinum credit card. Declined. Embarrassed, she handed over her secondary gold card. Declined. When she furiously called her bank from the boutique floor, screaming at the customer service representative, she was transferred directly to a specialized legal compliance department. The voice on the other end was polite, cold, and entirely unbothered by her screaming. They informed her that by order of the federal government, all of her checking accounts, savings accounts, and investment portfolios had been placed under an administrative freeze. She rushed home in her brand-new gold luxury SUV, only to find 2 black sedans parked at the end of her driveway. Men in dark suits were speaking with the landscape architects. When Evelyn tried to pull into the garage, an agent stepped forward and handed her an official federal asset seizure notice. The gold SUV, bought with uncleared funds, seized. The house, levied. But the final fatal blow came an hour later. Because the multi-million-dollar tax deficit exceeded the value of David's domestic estate, the IRS legally moved against Evelyn's personal, pre-existing assets to cover the difference. They liquidated her personal savings. They took the equity in her country club condo, and they legally seized her entire lifelong retirement fund. Evelyn wasn't just broke, she was completely wiped from the financial earth. Marcus, her shady strip mall lawyer, didn't even answer her calls. The moment he received a federal subpoena regarding his involvement in the international transfer, he formally withdrew as her counsel, shut down his office, and hired a criminal defense attorney of his own to save his own skin. It was a rainy Thursday evening, almost identical to the night David had given me his warning 6 months prior. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping a hot cup of tea, listening to the peaceful sound of the storm outside. Suddenly, a frantic, erratic knocking echoed from my front door. It wasn't the polite ring of a visitor. It was the desperate, pounding thud of someone who had nowhere else to run. I stood up, walked calmly to the door, and opened it. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, completely drenched by the rain, was Evelyn. The white wool coat she had worn so triumphantly in the courtroom was soaked, stained, and rumpled. Her expensive hair was plastered to her face, and her makeup was running down her cheeks in dark, muddy streaks. The designer sunglasses were gone, revealing eyes that were wide, bloodshot, and frantic with a primal, hysterical terror. "Clara," she sobbed, her voice cracking, completely stripped of its usual venom. "Clara, please, you have to help me." I didn't step back. I didn't invite her in. I simply stood in the doorway, holding my tea, watching her with absolute, serene silence. "They took everything, Clara," she wailed, grabbing the doorframe to steady her shaking hands. "The IRS, they locked the house, they towed the car, they froze my checking account. I went to the grocery store and I couldn't even buy a loaf of bread. They even took my retirement savings. I have nothing left. I'm going to be homeless." "I know," I said quietly, my voice perfectly level. Evelyn blinked through the rain, her jaw dropping slightly. You know?" "Of course I know, Evelyn," I replied, taking a slow sip of my tea. "David warned me about those offshore accounts 6 months ago. He built a beautiful protective trust to transition those funds legally. He explicitly told me that if anyone tried to blindly grab that money via a lump sum liquidation without the proper international disclosures, the IRS would freeze and seize everything they owned to cover the fraud penalties." She stared at me, her chest heaving as the horrific truth finally dawned on her. You knew?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a sudden sickening realization. "In the courtroom, you didn't fight me because you knew this would happen." "I stood completely out of your way, Evelyn," I said, looking directly into her hollow eyes. "You wanted to forge a will. You wanted to lie under oath. You wanted to tell the entire family that I was a parasite who ruined David's memory. You wanted his legacy so badly, I decided to let you have it, all of it, including the consequences." "Please, Clara," she screamed, dropping to her knees right there on the cold hallway floor, burying her face in her hands. "I'm his mother. I'm David's mother. You can't leave me like this. Just give me enough money for a rental apartment, or let me sleep on your couch. I have nowhere else to go. The family, none of them will answer my calls anymore. They all blocked me." I looked down at the woman who had disrupted my husband's funeral, who had kicked me out of my own home, and who had tried to erase my 12 years of love and loyalty for a handful of gold. "When I carried my boxes down the steps of my home, Evelyn, you told me that real blood always wins," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through her sobbing like a knife. "So go call your real blood. Go ask the cousins you bought first-class tickets for. Go ask the relatives you took to Monaco. Let's see how much they love you now that the champagne has run out." "Clara, please," she begged, reaching out to grab the hem of my dress. I stepped back, entirely out of her reach. "David's memory is safe with me, Evelyn. Good night." I pulled the heavy oak door shut, turning the deadbolt with a sharp final click. Through the thick wood I could hear her muffled, hysterical cries for a few minutes longer, until they finally faded away into the sound of the falling rain. The next morning the rain had stopped. The sun rose over the city, crisp and clear, filling my small apartment with warm, golden light. Arthur called me later that afternoon. Because Evelyn's executorship was legally voided due to criminal fraud and the forgery of the will, the probate court had automatically reinstated David's original, authentic trust. The domestic home, the life insurance policies, and the legitimate corporate assets were transferred back into my name, completely cleared of any liabilities. I sold the big house. I didn't want to live in a place stained by Evelyn's greed. I bought a small, beautiful cottage by the coast, surrounded by the ocean David loved so much. I replanted the roses. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty for what I did to Evelyn. And my answer is always the same. I didn't do anything to her. Evelyn was ruined by the exact same thing that destroys all vultures, her own insatiable, blind greed. I simply gave her the one thing she demanded, everything. I look out over the water now, holding a mug of coffee in the quiet morning light, and for the first time in a long time, I don't feel the heavy weight of grief. I feel peace. David's legacy isn't the millions in the bank or the companies he built. His legacy is the love we shared, the quiet mornings we had, and the protection he left behind for me, even from beyond the grave. The vultures can circle all they want, but in the end, the truth always wins.